Hello everyone, welcome back. So today I'm going to be talking about The Ritual by Adam Nevill. And I'm going to say this right now. I don't know how I'm going to talk about this book without spoilers. And so if you're not interested in hearing any spoilers, and I'm afraid there may have to be some rather major ones, uh, just go ahead and click off now and uh, come back after you've read the book, I suppose. But I am going to have to spoil some elements of this for you. So this book is a novel of four friends from Britain, who go on a backpacking trip in Sweden, kind of towards the end of the year. Not quite winter yet, but definitely getting towards winter, towards autumn. It's that part of the year where all the tourists basically go away. And so they are out on this trail in Sweden all by themselves, and I guess a national park. So they all went to college together. They were roommates at the time, and it is now 15 years later after they graduated. So they are in their late 30s, thereabouts. And Luke is sort of the black sheep. He has never been married. He never had his own house. He's bounced from apartment to apartment, from job to job. He's never had a career. And his friends Dom and Phil, they are both married men with children who have these big fancy jobs, and they make a lot of money and have fancy cars and big houses, and they look down on Luke, and they treat him rather poorly. The fourth friend is named Hutch. He is quietly successful. He's newly married. He is the owner of I believe, a bike shop. And he is a very confident, easygoing kind of person. He is the most admired friend of this group. He is basically their leader because he is very kind and, like I said, very confident. And it was his idea for them to go to Sweden. They had all gotten together at his wedding, and he wanted to get the band back together, basically, and go on a trip together. And so 6 months later, they are in Sweden. And Luke and Hutch are in pretty good shape. And they have been on trips like this together several times. And Dom and Phil are completely out of shape. They were supposed to kind of get in shape over the 6 months, and they did not. They brought the wrong equipment. They very much are depicted as having a easy city boy style lifestyle, and they are just not prepared for this hike at all. And once they are out, it is cold, it is wet, it gets dark early. Phil has blisters all over his feet because he wore new shoes and he wasn't used to hiking. Dom has injured his knee and it is rapidly getting worse. And they are a several days walk from either where they started or where they are going. And they are walking on a plain, kind of like a ridged plain, above a deep forest. And it is a virgin forest. It's never been logged or anything like that. And so Hutch says, if we take a shortcut through that forest right there, we will be able to get where we're going. We'll spend one night in the forest, and then we'll walk right out the other side, and that's it. Then they can go home, whatever. And so they go out into this forest, and the first thing they find is a elk, which has been torn apart and hung in a tree by a person, by a creature they do not know, a wild animal. They think maybe it was a bear. But this is the first thing they meet once they're in the forest for about an hour, and it all gives them a very bad feeling because it doesn't smell. It doesn't smell because it's fresh, and that means that whatever did it is still pretty close. So as they're going through this forest, it's very mossy, it's very wet, there are a lot of fallen logs, and they gradually become worn out from this trip. And Adam Nevill does that really, really well. He discusses the exhaustion and the coldness and being wet all the time, being exhausted and being whipped by things in your face, by limbs and branches, and slipping and just being in pain and not really knowing where you're going. And I thought that was really, really well done. This book is really atmospheric in the first half. And they come to a cabin, and none of them have a good feeling about this place. It's in the middle of this forest. It's falling apart. There are bones on the inside of it, hung on nails, skulls hung on nails, and they find something in an upstairs room, which is really frightening. I'm not going to describe that here because I think that this book is worth reading, but I will describe the cabin. So I'll read a little bit of this book here. 4 kilometers due east from the thing in the tree, they found a house. But this was only after another 4 kilometers of wading through ivy, nettles, broken branches, oceans of wet leaves, and the impenetrable naked spikes formed by the limbs of smaller trees. Like everywhere else, the seasons were confused. Autumn had come late after the wettest summer since records began in Sweden, and the mighty forest was only now beginning to shuck its dead parts to the ground with fury. And as they had all remarked, it was so bloody dark. The fixed ceiling of the trees let little daylight fall below to the tangled floor. To Hutch, the forest canopy left an incremental impression of going deeper inside something that narrowed around them. While looking for the light and space of an open sky, they were actually descending into an environment that was only getting darker and more disorienting, step by step. During the late afternoon and into the early evening, when they were too tired to do anything but stagger about and swear at the things that poked and scratched their faces, the forest had become so dense it was impossible to move in any single direction for more than a few meters. So they had moved backwards and forwards to circle the larger obstacles, like the giant prehistoric trunks that had crashed down years before and been consumed by slippery lichen. And they had zigzagged all points of the compass to avoid the endless wooden spears of the branches and the snares of the small roots and thorny bushes that now filled every space between the trees. The upper branches ratcheted up their misery by funneling down upon them the deafening fall of rain in the world above, creating an incessant barrage of cold droplets the size of marbles. But just before 7 they suddenly fell across something they were sure they would never see again. A trail, narrow but wide enough for them to walk upright in single file without lurching about or being tugged backwards by a sleeping roll or backpack snagged on a branch. By this time Hutch knew that none of them even cared where the trail led, and they would have followed it north just for the luxury of being able to walk upright and in a straight line. Even though the trail would lead them either due east or even further out west instead of southwards, the forest had cut them their first break. He could sort out exactly where they were later and chose the eastern direction to try and compensate for the northwestward course the forest had thus far enforced. Someone had been here before them, and the path suggested it went somewhere worth going. Somewhere out of this dark and choking nowhere. It led to a house. Their packs were soaked. Rivulets of water ran from their coats and soaked the thighs of their trousers, and Phil's jeans were sodden and black. The jeans Hutch told him in Corunna not to take in case it rained. From the cuffs of their sleeves, the rain poured onto their scratched and red hands, and it was impossible to tell if the rain had saturated and then seeped into the fleeces and clothes they wore underneath their Gore-Tex coats, or if the moisture was sweat soaking outwards from their hot skin. They were dirty and dripping and exhausted, and no one had the nerve to ask Hutch out loud where they could pitch a tent in the forest. But that was what they had all been thinking. He knew it. On either side of the trail, the undergrowth was as high as a man's waist, and it was during that time when the fear in Hutch's own belly began to turn into a shivery panic reminding him of childhood, and when the realization of the fact that he had made a terrible misjudgment that was now endangering the lives of his three friends hit him, that they found the house. A dark and sunken building that slouched at the rear of an overgrown paddock. The ground was covered to the height of their knees with nettles and sopping weeds. A wall of the impenetrable forest they were lost inside bordered the grounds. "It's empty. Let's get in there," Phil said, his voice wheezy with asthma. And so they go into this house, and it changes their lives forever and leads to the deaths of some of them. I said there were going to be spoilers, and there are going to be spoilers. So this goes into some interesting territory about Luke and his friends, and why his friends belittle him at every Dom and Phil belittle him at every step of the way. And it is really an interesting take on, I think, how people see each other in society, how friends treat each other after a while, how when you've never had a wife, you've never had kids, you've never had an apartment or a house, you've never had a career, how people can treat you with contempt, both because they think that they are better than you because of their material gain, and also because their envy and resentment of your freedom. And it gradually comes out that Phil and Dom's life are not as wonderful and spectacular as they seem at all. And we get this really interesting take of them going through this forest, and they go into this house, they have this experience that changes their lives. Something is vastly evil and wrong in this place. It is to do with the old gods, and they start being pursued by this creature that hunts them through the woods. Okay, so gradually, one by one, Luke's friends are killed by this creature. Like I said, there are spoilers. I'm sorry, but there are spoilers. I have to tell spoilers. And Luke, exhausted, completely and totally exhausted to the point of hallucination. He is completely thirsty, hungry. They have no food. They have no water. Luke becomes on his own. And this is where Adam Nevill, in my opinion, goes wrong. He completely shifts gears, and the second half of this book, I think, and I hate to say this because I really went into this, I loved the movie. I wanted to really like this book. The book is quite different from the movie, and I see what Adam Nevill was trying to do, but he shifts gears, and Luke is taken hostage by a black metal Norwegian band who are on this trail of destruction. They have burned down churches and committed murders, and they are teenagers, and they have terrible music that they blast all the time, and they are named Fenris, Loki, who is their leader, and Surtur, which means fire, and I'm sure I mispronounced that. And there is a little old lady who lives in this house in the woods who doesn't really talk, and every time she steps, she goes clomp, clomp, clomp. And we are treated to 200 some odd pages of Luke being in just about 200 pages of Luke being held captive by this teenage black metal band. And they went from being Satan worshippers to now they are worshiping the old god, right? And so they are going to use Luke as a sacrifice to this old god. And there are a lot of conversations between Luke and Fenris and Luke and Loki. Surtur is depicted as being basically a psychotic lunatic who howls and screams and wants to tear Luke to shreds and cut off his toes and fingers. And only Loki is able to keep them back. And Loki is kind of your teenage know-it-all philosopher guy. And I just felt like the story really went off the rails there. And there's it was just such a strange choice, right? To go from this very atmospheric story of being in the woods in this wet, cold, dark, inhospitable woods with this ancient evil hunting you and your friends, right? And knowing what it's going to do to you when it catches up to you, and then just shifting gears into this Luke being stuck in a bed and zip tied in this bed, and what are they going to do with me? And man, they play terrible music, and that's a stupid argument you've got there, Loki. I just felt like Adam Nevill should have stuck with the first story and not included the second half. Uh, I think that the movie handled this much better than I feel like it was streamlined, and I'm sorry, if Adam Nevill should watch this, uh, I don't mean to say anything bad. I just feel like the second half of this novel did not work. That's just my take on it. And so I loved the first half of this book. I really did. But the second half just didn't do it for me. And the climax just didn't do it for me. And so that's really all I have to say about The Ritual. I wanted to like it. I liked half of it. I didn't like the second half of it. I think this is the first review I've ever given where there are spoilers, and I really didn't know how to get around the spoilers because I couldn't just say that the first half of the book was really good and then say, yeah, that second part stinks. I mean, I felt that I kind of needed to explain why. So, like I said, sorry about the spoilers, but I really like the first half of this book. I would love to read more books by Adam Nevill. And I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.